Gentlemen, welcome to the program. It's such a pleasure to have all of you on our discussion. In London, John Ross, a senior fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies with Renmin University of China. In Vienna, Anis Bayraktavish, who is a professor and chairperson with the International Law and Global Political Studies. And also in Beijing, Wang Yiwei, director of the Center for EU Studies at Renmin University of China. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Now, this is a significant meeting, many would argue, after a few years of no direct top leadership interactions. But it seems that things are starting up after the G20 Summit. Anis?
In a way, we can say it like that, but I think that let's say the de-escalation was the key word that was missing for quite long, and I think that we have to come back to, let's say, de-escalation and to reconsider the fast speed track decoupling of economies, primarily talking about, let's say, the Western economies and China, and a military confrontation, which in a way is taking place in Ukraine. I think G20 was used symbolically as some sort of a breaking point. We will see whether this will become a process or this is just a sporadic, lonely event. But there is a growing voice within the, not only politics, but also especially with the businesses that are pushing and pressing political leaders to get back to the negotiating tables and to discuss things which would benefit everyone.
That's an interesting analysis. Professor Wang Yiwei, about that too, we see interactions starting from the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz visit to China and then G20 Summit, where Chinese top leadership meeting with top leadership of the European Union and certainly from some of the major European capitals. And now we see the European Council President visiting China. So how do you see the evolution of this warming up step by step back to win-win?
We hope so. Bilateral, multilateral, to deal with the European Union, this is very natural. But the problem is for the European Union side. This time is only the president of the European Council, Michel, visit, without president of the European Commission, von der Leyen. They have some contradictions and they have disputes. Some people, even from the European Union side, criticize von der Leyen is too pro-America, so-called American president of the European Union. They also have the competition, who represents the European Union, and how to deal with China. Somebody follow a more with Americans approach, like the von der Leyen, so-called decouple in the name of the resilience of the supply chain. But actually, Michel, the president of the European Council, and the French President Macron, which also will visit China soon, I think resilient not means decouple. The diversification of the supply chain, the China is still top trade partner for the European Union, and also for the partner to deal with the global challenges.
John?
The reality is at the moment that Europe is in its greatest state of chaos since World War II. I mean, we have the highest inflation for 40 years. We've got economic growth, which has slowed by more than a half in that 40 years. And we've got a major war going on. This is a pretty serious situation. And undoubtedly, it's been followed by the fact that Europe has followed US policy uncritically or too uncritically. I mean, the reason the war in Ukraine is taking place is because of the expansion of NATO. And although it's said that the inflation is due to the war in Ukraine, factually, this is not true. 95% of the inflation had already started because of before the war started, because of policy in the United States. So if the European Union wants to find a way out of this chaos by better relations with China, that would be very fruitful.
Even though one could tell very clearly, you among yourself do not necessarily agree with one another, but one thing, it seems that there is a common ground. That is, we see some adjustments from the European side in terms of policy toward China, or approaches toward China. This is happening at the time, this visit, when the European Union is trying to, together with the major European capitals and other forces of the society, such as business community, trying to come up with some concerted approaches toward China after the abrupt events such as the war between Russia and Ukraine. So do you see, Anissa, people are going to give more cool-minded approach in terms of thinking about how to deal with China?
There is definitely an outcry. It's not a push even, it's an outcry within the business community, and they are also feeling the labor and consumers to do something finally. So I think politics actually is replying to that, and they have simply to send some responses, at least some let's say therapeutical political voices. And I think this is the part of the answer why the top Brussels official is visiting China. Decoupling and in a way demonization of China, or attempt to decouple from China, to alienate from China, was, I think, too optimistic, too fast, and I think the recalibration comes back. So this is maybe the second part of the story. And then the third, actually, for United States, the strategic depth to be a real global power is Western Europe. So whether Europe would play a certain role more than just being a strategic depth, a certain geographic territory, we will also see from the visits and from the really bold and far-sighted political moves like the visit that is taking place right now.
John, short term, of course, about the economy and how to work, and the longer term, more strategic, how Europe, or at least the European Union, representing major capitals except the UK, which is not anymore in the EU, are going to navigate the strategic uncertainties for opportunities rather than challenges.
They should have put their foot down with the United States and said that the idea of expanding NATO into Eastern Europe was a very bad and dangerous idea. There were very serious people in the United States, for example, Kennan, who's the author of US policy during the first Cold War, warned that this was an extremely dangerous step. And it's proved to be absolutely dangerous, both from the military and from the economic point of view. But at the present time, I'm afraid that there is not great sign that they're prepared to stand up to the United States. However, because the economic situation has become so serious, and Europe has, the United States even attacking them on immediate things with its industrial policy, the Anti-Inflation Act, for example, hopefully they're looking at better relationships with China. Or more objective relationships with China. I'd not be terribly optimistic, but it is positive that the visit is taking place.
Yi-Wei, what about for you? I mean, at this point, it seems that countries and economies are looking inward to deal with the burning crisis, inflation, economies, employment, and the list goes on, and the challenged global supply chains. So how do you see this dealing with short-term urgencies might help economies, particularly those on the European continent, to clarify the strategies and also the approaches?
Well, just for Borrelli, the high representatives of the common security and the foreign policy of the European Union argued before that the Europeans' prosperity rely on cheap energy from Russia and cheap products from China. And now they want to decouple with Russia, even decouple with China is terrible. It's a suicide, actually, behavior of the Europeans' prosperity, which different with the US. The US can print the US dollars, can sell the inflation to others. The European Union cannot do that. So how to deal with China is how to deal with the future of European Union. The so-called resilient, actually, it's difficult to diversify from the made in China, because China as a water factory cannot easily be simply to replaced by any like made in India or Vietnam or any other places, even increase the costs for European Union. Now they need lots of money to deal with inflation, energy crisis, and also the war in Ukraine. So I think we need to have a more rational relations with China, between China and the European Union.
Anis, it's very divided, I understand, in Europe. Just to look at the first trip made by the German Chancellor Scholz to China and how much media frenzy it stirred up. And of course, the mixed commentaries after the visit. Of course, G20 is more a multilateral platform in which many leaders interact with one another. But during that time, the G20 and the APEC economic leaders meeting, we did notice words coming from major European capitals, such as that from the French President Macron, talking about the strategic competition between China and the United States. It's going to be dangerous for everybody because countries have to be forced to stand with different sides, and that is going to be hurtful for everybody. So how do you see the realization of the current realities for some European capitals, whether they are in their own political trouble is one thing, but how they are looking at now the situation?
I think there are many levels, and we can devote just one serial, to try to just to touch upon all of those issues that are playing. It's a civilizational issue, it's a historical, it's political, economic, financial. There are, security issues. So there are different facets and different levels of this, but definitely an outcry comes from the businesses and from the ordinary people, which are actually feeling the pressure for, so it's an enormous inflation. It's a print of money, 4,000, if I'm not mistaken, 4,000 billions has been printed of the brand new banknotes of the US dollar, 6,000 of euros. So practically the burden of this, let's say, ill-made recalibration or the new reality has been hit hard businesses and ordinary people. And of course, the pressure comes now from the bottom to up to do something. And the top politics within the member states and also in the Brussels is changing rhetorics. So from the previous rhetoric, which was undeniable and clear line, they are actually modifying stances.
The European Union earlier already drew up its policy of so-called approaches toward China. John, do you see those languages are likely to be modified even more?
Well, they're under two contradictory pressures. And it's funny, if you take, for example, the British papers reporting on a recent speech by the British Prime Minister on foreign policy, one of the papers said that he had abandoned the golden age with China, and the Financial Times said that he was seeking positive engagement with China. So they couldn't even make up their own mind about what was going on. And I think that the reason is because they're
maybe that is true. They cannot make up their minds about what is going on and what to do next.
I think that is the case because they're under two contradictory pressures. One is economically, it is absolutely rational to have good relations with China. Germany benefited enormously from its relationships with China. China became its largest trading partner. The United States is under its Anti-Inflation Act is carrying out subsidies to its industries, which are directly aimed against Europe and will damage Europe. On the other hand, politically, the United States demands hostility towards China. So they're caught in a contradictory economics and business lead in one direction, political pressure from the United States leads in the other, and therefore exactly there is a conflict which is going on. It's not totally clear what will be the outcome of this situation yet.
Right. So Anis, the decision-making process on the European continent would be very interesting in this regard. As we are in a stage, there are different forces arguing for different things and different directions, and they all have their quote-unquote reasons. So how do you see that is evolving now?
It's $1 million question, so decision-making process within
$1 trillion
the EU,
question, possibly.
I published book on this, but still, you know, I don't dare to answer this that easily, you know. Definitely, we definitely have, you know, so we had this, how shall we call it, you know, democracy deficit. We have this abstentia or the apathy of voters. I think people are getting back into arena, you know, people get alerted, people get awaked, you know, and in that way, you know, I see good news. We will still need some time, but we will witness a new party formation as the classical left and right parties are losing on their support and membership. So definitely we will need and we will see the adjustments. I mean, in short, China have been seen as a perfect servant, but China as a master of the world, or one of the co-masters of the world, was not really a pleasant news for the Western leaders. And then they started panicking and emotionally reacting to this. So we have to objectivize our relations. And I think the moment to stop China, to slow down China as a factor in the world, this train has long gone. And I think many in the West are not able to accept this. They are still living in denial, and they have to accept this reality, this maybe inconvenient truth. And someone has from the leadership to actually to pass this message. And I think we are in that process. The recalibration of the world is taking place, and simply you are derogating yourself as a power if you are demographically and economically unable to project your power, or if you are not having this position. So the recalibration of the world will happen. I hope that it will be not paid by ordinary people, and that we will reduce number of victims, be it of the hunger or of the direct military conflicts.
Interesting. So you see the Chinese leadership is likely to convey those messages to the visiting European Council president?
Well, yes, I certainly think that they will understand better China's position. It's always good to talk, right? The problem that they've got, though, is that they've got to take certain strategic decisions. In order to get out of the mess in Europe, firstly, they need to do two things. Firstly, they need to have good economic ties with China, because it's the most important trading partner, particularly for the most important economy in Europe, which is Germany. That's why, indeed, German business is very dissatisfied with the present situation. But on the other hand, they need to have not conflictual relationships with Russia. A rational choice in Europe is to stop the expansion of NATO so as to avoid the confrontation with Russia. That will restore the cheap gas, which has been seriously lost now at the present time. That's going to be very difficult, much more difficult to put together relations with Russia again than it is with China. And secondly, have good economic relations with China. That can be done rather easily, because there's not the same type of geographical conflict, but it means going against what the United States is prepared to do. And the United States at the present time is demanding that other countries take a confrontational policy with China. And unfortunately, we know even some countries which have very important trading relationships with China, such as Australia, Australia is very dependent economically upon China. It hasn't been prepared to oppose US foreign policy. So there's a lack of political will amongst the European leadership at the present time. Hopefully that will change, but I don't think it will without a great deal of pressure from below.
Right. A lot of things are fluid, as we all know, gentlemen, frankly speaking, that things that are agreed upon or decided today might not be relevant anymore, given the circumstances tomorrow. So how do you see both the Chinese and the European Union leadership are trying to, let's just say, cross the river by filling the stone, quoting a famous quote from Mr. Deng Xiaoping during the reform era of China. John?
Well, I think the problem for the Europeans is that they're being told by the United States not to get into the river. Hopefully, we may say with visit, he's put a foot into the river. I hope that it'll take a further stone. But you've got to say to the United States, I'm sorry, we are prepared to go into this river. We've got to look after our own interests, not what you're telling us to do. And there are some people who are prepared to do that, and the pressure is getting greater. But at the moment, the majority opinion is not in favor of it. I wish I could give you other news, but in a very serious matter, there's no point in being extremely realistic. It will take some more resolution to stand up to the United States than has been shown at the moment. But a visit is a visit. I'm not sure that the United States would like this visit. So this is a good beginning. And the Chinese leadership's policy is extremely clear and rational, which is they want the best possible relationships with the European Union. So if we want to use another analogy, China has the door open. The question is whether the European Union is prepared to come into the room.
What about your analogy, Anis?
Look, interestingly, since we are talking about United States nearly as a buzzword, so interestingly, you have Chomsky, who is on the very left of American thought, and Kissinger on the very right of the American thought, talking nearly the same things, that we have to objectivize, we have to de-escalate and de-psychologize our international relations and come back to the negotiating table, not live in denial and come back and accept, the inconvenient truths. So basically, I mean, not to go into history lessons, everything starts actually with the Nixon administration, notably with Mr. Kissinger, who comes and starts with the one China policy. And then China, especially Chinese coastal areas, identified as an industrial suburbia of the West. And it was primarily a drive from United States, but it's in a way cynical actually that Europeans have to pay for the miscalculation or too optimistic belief that China will be a perfect servant and never become a master of its own destiny or the power that projects itself globally, or at least in its own theater, seen by United States eyes. So I think Europe has to decide, is it a strategic depth or the independent player? And it will, as you rightfully said, everything is very fluid, and we will see, how the things are going. But basically, the canons and the rules are not applying. We are living in very dangerous but very interesting times.
Right. So it seems that, Anis, what you're trying to say is that wake up, there is a river at least.
Exactly. Wake up and get to the river, don't be shy or ashamed or fear.
Yiwei, your analogy, if so to speak.
Very interesting comparison, actually. Firstly, you said there's a river, one river we need to cross jointly, actually. And secondly, there's an opposite side. We can destination. We have the hope, and also hopefully they have the stone for you to catch and to touch. But the Americans, the Europeans think about the rules-based international order. So the rules is the stone, but actually the rules, they set the rules. So China not against that. China said the rules should based on the UN international law. That's the stone. So we should jointly to cross the stone, not just you cross the stone and then put China fallen in the water. So that is not the game. So fair competition is a strive for excellence. It's not the beating others for the actually in the rest of the arena. I think that's the China approach.
Yiwei, John, and Anis, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen.